A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine and a warm welcome to a night of particular celebration. Now, it's not often that an episode of this show goes by without some sort of toast raised to a terrific winemaker or a proud estate or some wine event that's put a smile on our collective faces. But today is one which makes me particularly happy because it comes on the back of not just half a century of winemaking brilliance, but from just over a week ago, trying some wine in celebration of that half century with a South African house. And I use that word because I think they're as much house as they are estate, a South African icon in winemaking that has had not just 50 years of making wine, but 50 years of dazzling the world of wine drinkers with the best of not just Stellenbosch, but South Africa as a whole. And so today's show is one in which we pay tribute to Kanonkop and the 2023 vintage, which on from 1973 marks 50 years of being such an integral part of South African wine and playing such an important role in making the world sit up and notice how a red wine in particular is devilishly good. And so today we have a winemaker, we have an owner, and we've got the man who probably knows more about the wine industry than anybody else in the country on the show together as we celebrate Kanonkop. And in just a few moments, we'll have all three of my guests on to do exactly that. It's been a busy week. My apologies for no show on Monday. I had a wonderful kind of Darth Vader 12 packs of Marlboro Red voice to me, so there was not much point in trying to get on screen, but it gave me some time to recover for today, and it also gave me some time over the last day or two to check out a couple of new spots, including Aikido, which I was at today, and we might try and do something with their sake a little later. New Japanese restaurant, the Leonardo building in Sands. And what made it particularly interesting is not just the food. The food was really good. Some of the signature sashimi, the fresh sea bass in particular, was exceptional. But the wine list, which has a great number of South African wines, not a huge amount, but the ones they do have are very, very pleasant, probably 25 or so. But then you jump into a little French selection and suddenly you see Chateau Figeac and Haut-Briand and Mouton Rothschild and Lafite all sitting on a quiet city centre or Santon Centre Japanese restaurant. So if you like pairing your sushi with first growths from Bordeaux, then that is what you need to look out for at Kido. Speaking of first growths, we're still working out the exact plans, but I shall be in Bordeaux this time next week, so possibly a show from there if we get the mechanics right, but I shall keep you posted. I have got three wonderful wine guests to talk to. Just before I do that, though, here are a couple of pieces of news from the wine world. Well, this is next Tuesday, and this is so exciting. It is an evening of good wine for a good cause. The catalogue has just gone live with Strauss for the third edition of the Dan Really Likes Wine charity auction, brought to you by Strauss, Norman Goodfellows, and the Nickel Foundation. And of course, Dan Really Likes Wine. All money from this going to three splendid platforms. Reach for a Dream, changing the lives of not just kids with life-threatening illnesses, but also their families, changing lives through the Pinotage Youth Development Academy as well, giving young people a chance to get a hospitality education that takes them well into the industry and has a terrific track record, and the Cape Winemakers Guild Trust, ensuring the next generation of South African winemakers is not just family supported and put in place, but is also far more representative of South Africa and ensures that we are unearthing winemaking gems that might otherwise have passed us by. The work the Guild has done in the past has been terrific. The work it's going to do in the future is even greater, and we're very proud to be able to support the Trust, to support the Academy, and to support Reach for a Dream. We do have a few tickets still going, and those tickets are available at Norman Goodfellows, not too hard to find on the site. And you could be doing everything from spending time at the Farside Villa at Tybosh to walking away with 18 litres of 2008 La Motte Syrah. We've got big bottles from everybody from Takara to Klein Constantia, wine from Kanonkop, importantly, who join us on the show this evening. Across Stellenbosch, stuff from Duncan Savage, from the Mullinews, from Creation, from Storm, from Newton Johnson, from Peter Allen Finlayson, and that is just a touch of the 58 combined lots. That also includes a trip up to the Outpost in the Northern Kruger luxury safari at its peak. All of those up for sale Tuesday evening, 350 rand a ticket, includes your wine and snacks and the chance to bid and join in and be part of a really cool night. So if you'd like to join us, you can. If you're not in Johannesburg, you'd still like to join us, it will be online with Strauss as well. So either way, hoping to see you on Tuesday evening. Helderberg Fresh, this is coming up towards the end of the month, 25th of November. It's the summer garden party that Somerset West revels in each and every year. It's at Lawrenceford for 2 until 6. Doesn't sound like it's a huge amount of time. It's the perfect amount of time to not just drink some great wine, but also enjoy chefs from the area. And you're not just drinking the wine of Lawrenceford, but from the surrounding estates as well. Helderbergfresh.co.za. Nip on there to have a look, see if you're keen to go, and grab your tickets. And this is one I thought I mentioned. Did a bit of a wine trip last week with a team from Norman Goodfellows. We were down in the winelands, and we got to spend some time at Jordan, where this man, Shark Nelson, I think he's been about 2 decades or so, he's been at Jordan working under Kathy and Gary Jordan. And to commemorate the visit, he very kindly brought out a Magnum 2021 Jordan Cabernet Sauvignon, and it was glorious. Smooth and balanced, fruit perfectly poised, and a delight to drink. No hint of anything coming close to past its best. In fact, probably a good 5-10 years still in it at this kind of level. So thank you, Shark. Something very special. It was also the opportunity to try out the new restaurant, which has Martinez Ferreira, formerly of DW 1113 in Dunkeld. Martinez now moved down there, and unsurprisingly, Martinez's food is a delight. He always mixes a sense of invention and fun with some culinary flair and substance. Just a really, really good meal to go to the wine tasting. Gary, Kathy, Shark, Martinez, thank you for a lovely, lovely afternoon at Jordan. And that came straight after some time at De Morganton, where we're far too busy tasting with Alistair Rimmer to take any photos. But thank you, Alistair. Thank you, too, to Corby and Michael and the team at Bartony. That deck at Bartony is always charming. And the real focus on Cabernet and Sauvignon, Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay is bearing fruit in every way as the wine improves with each passing vintage. Also got to try out some new dishes at Delagraph and the sweeping deck looking over the winelands, and a night out at Tybosh, which was terrific. And along with Tybosh, also got to spend some time with Ken Forrester and some of his wine, including the Bridge. If you haven't had that, that is his Napa project, Cabernet Sauvignon, made a South African touch on top of American winemaking in California. It's won a number of awards already, and one to look out for if you can get it. Not much of it, but a treat if you can. Speaking of treats, last Monday night was a real treat. Got to spend some time with the brothers Krige, as well as Abrie Beeslaar, who's the winemaker and has been for 20-odd years now at Kanonkop. It's one of those estates where the moment you mention it, people immediately get that sense of class, of history, and of, I think what Tim Atkin has said regularly is a first growth in South African standards. The first growths in Bordeaux are the original big guns, the wines that really set the scene for everybody else. And I think that is exactly what Kanonkop has done. And we got a sense of that as we tasted older vintages, some of the newer wine, and ran through a history lesson or two from Johan Krige over the course of the evening. Johan's sadly not able to be with us today, but he's much younger, much better looking, much more athletic brother Paul is with us. So too is Abrie Beeslaar, who more than 20 years, he must have been about 12 when he started at Kanonkop. Abrie's with us, and so too Emile Joubert. He's not just one of my favorite wine writers, but someone who knows the history of Kanonkop intimately. Gentlemen, welcome. Lovely to have you on the show in this moment of celebration and raising a glass to such a special occasion. And Paul, one that we heard from your brother as he ran through the welcome over the course of last Monday and Tuesday, has done, even though it's 50 years, which is a long time, it seems like you guys have been going for so much longer, because that sense of history that immediately comes to the fore when we talk about Kanonkop does give the feel that kind of Jan van Riebeck must have been drinking Kanonkop. It's been with us quite so long, which is a wonderful testament to who you guys are and what you do. Take us back to the very start, not just 73, the first vintage, but before that and the build up to it, those very early days and how Kanonkop came into being.
Thanks. Thank you, Dan. Emile actually wrote our book, so I think his knowledge on how it begins is a bit better than mine. But my great-grandfather, which was J.W. Sauer, he started it off, and in the 30s, 1930s, I think my grandfather or my great-grandmother sold off a piece of uitkyk. Uitkyk and Kanonkop used to be one farm. So she sold off a piece, and she then kept Kanonkop, because that is where Paul Sauer wanted to plant his little vineyards, and he had that dream, everything. And that started off in around about 1941, 42. And yeah, so we've been making wine since 1942, been selling it in bulk to Farmers Winery in those days. And then from 86, we've put in everything in the bottle. And here we are today. So yeah, it's a journey, and I think it's nice to be in a family like this, that we all still appreciate the wine and the vineyards and the soil and everything with it. And luckily, we had a couple of winemakers only, not a lot of them, which also became part of the family. So yeah, it's a happy story.
The state of where you are now is something I'm going to ask you at the end of the show, and also get a sense of where Kanonkop might still be going. But what about when Kanonkop got back? And I'll ask Emile for his thoughts on this in a second. But when you kicked things off, what, for your understanding, what was the sense of ambition? What was the plan? What did the family think Kanonkop was going to be all about?
Well, when we started off in 73, we were lucky to have Jan Boland as our winemaker. And obviously there's a lot of marketing promotion with that. And it's actually my dad that started. He bought shares from my grandfather, and he actually wanted to put some wine in the bottle. And they started off with a small amount of Cabernet and Pinotage, basically. And yeah, luckily Jan played Springbok at that stage, so everything went from there, and he's an absolute fantastic winemaker. And then in 1981, when Beyers came, I mean, that is some other energy that suddenly arrived there. And we all know Beyers, and he's got ideas that you can never think of it, but I mean, he's got his ideas, and from there on it went off. And then obviously in the 90s, when it opened up for export and everything, we went a little bit bigger. And I think in the early 90s we started with a cadet range, and yeah, so at the end of the day, what Kanonkop is about, I think, is to produce quality red wine and still sell it at reasonable prices.
And that you have continued to do, with one exception, Paul Sauer 2015, where the prices are completely unreasonable, but also completely justified, given that wine. We'll come to that wine a little later on in the show. Emile is one of the, not just foremost wine writers of our time, but also a great wine historian with a particular love of Kanonkop, echoing, I suppose, to a degree, some of what Paul has run over. But give us your sense of the introduction of Kanonkop and how it, first of all, just found its feet, and then slowly but surely began to emerge as one of the real big guns of Stellenbosch.
Hi, Dan. I was fortunate to kind of, I wouldn't say grow up in Kanonkop, but I spent a lot of time there as a kid. my dad, I just come back from England in 1974, and I couldn't speak a word of English, of Afrikaans. So my dad said he's going to send me away to a farm for a couple of weeks where there's a winemaker who's a friend of his, and this winemaker spoke at that time about as much English as I could speak Afrikaans. So I was forced to, not forced at all, it's a great privilege, to spend weeks as a kid on Kanonkop with Jan Boeland Coetzee, with the idea that he was going to be my sort of linguist. He was going to teach me to speak Afrikaans, and we didn't have any choice but to start conversing in my pidgin Afrikaans and his pidgin English. So I've been in Kanonkop since, as I said, 1974. Obviously, I wasn't drinking red wine at that stage. I was still confined to Riesling and Chardonnay. But Kanonkop always had an aura about it. And after I'd spent a summer there and reading newspapers and publications like Wynboer magazine and so forth, there's always an aura around Kanonkop. And Paul told me a couple of years ago when we were researching that book, when he started pouring wine at wine shows, the queues at Kanonkop were always longer than the queues for any other wine. That's back in the 80s. And I asked him, but why? And Paul's answer was, you tell me. Kanonkop never really went big into the marketing game in terms of public relations or advertising, but it just always had the aura. And I think that's one of the magic things about wine is how do you explain the reverence that a brand manages to capture? How does a brand kind of command that attention even before you've opened the bottle of wine or tasted it, but you've seen the label. It's come with a legacy and an aura. And I think the combination was, well, as a youngster at that time, I mean, anything to do with a Springbok rugby team. I remember in those days, we didn't play World Cups. We didn't have tours every year. Being a Springbok was really an icon personality. And Jan was known as the Springbok Wynmaker. I mean, he was marketing, I think, Massey Ferguson tractors. It was like mixed up between Massey Ferguson and John Deere because farmers are very sensitive about that. But Jan was out there as the Springbok, and he was making wine at a farm called Kanonkop. And the whole theme of Kanonkop, Cannon, Hillock, that immediately grabbed your imagination, even as a kid at that stage. And I think that reverberated through to the public as well. So even before they tasted Kanonkop, there was just something about the brand. You had that label. Paul, Abrie's far too young, he won't remember it, but Paul will remember that label, just like a sepia photograph of that hillock, that Cannon hillock part of Simonsburg. And it just captured the imagination. And then along with that, you had the personality, obviously. You had this aura of the Springbok winemaker. You had a great brand name like Kanonkop, which reverberated. The wine just turned out to be absolutely incredible. The 1973 vintage, the very first vintage, it's still one of the most sought after wines today. I know everybody's talking about the GS66, which is fantastic wine. But those in the know will tell you that get your hands on a bottle of 1973 Kanonkop Cabernet or Pinotage is really the holy grail for wine collectors. And I know that trying to procure a couple of bottles to celebrate this 50th anniversary. So from day one, it captured the imagination, and that was a great start. But it was a small start, as Paul alluded to, because Kanonkop was still through the 70s making bulk wine for that Claret Blanche on the farm, that Sauvignon Blanc, that Chardonnay, Riesling, a lot of Shiraz was planted. And then I think in the 80s, as legend has it, the family just got together and decided the way forward is going to be to specialize. Jan Boeland had converted the farm from a Shiraz farm to a Cabernet farm. And at last night's function, Abrie actually thanked Jan, who was there, for turning Kanonkop into a Cabernet farm. And the dice just fell onto the right numbers, because when Kanonkop continued focusing on Cabernet and Pinotage, and from 1981 the Paul Sour, and it's just a story of greatness, consistent greatness. And as Dani de Wet said in the speech last night, Kanonkop just has universal greatness. Whether you're opening that bottle of wine in Hong Kong or New York, Paris, or wherever, it's deemed to be a great wine and a great South African success story. So I'd like to say, yes, fantastic terroir, great winemakers, great quality wine, but it's also got that 20% necessity to make a wine an icon, which is that bit of mystery as to why it's deemed such a fantastic wine and captures the reverence and imagination. And I just hope that that 20% remains a mystery, which I think it will do. Dan?
I'm going to take some of that mystery away because I feel part of it is down to some quite remarkable people, and they fit into two very simple categories, the owners and the winemakers. I'm going to come to our current winemaker in a moment, but just very briefly, if you will, Emile, for you, why Johan and Paul as the brothers, and then initially Jan Boehlert, who went from Springbok great to arguably winemaking greater, and that's no dismissal of his rugby prowess, just an acknowledgement of what a good winemaker he is. But just quickly on those two brothers and then on Jan Boehlert, how this combination of people was such a big part of creating what is now the legend of Kanonkop.
But Dad, I've said it before, I think, tired of hearing it, but I believe in the human DNA being as much as part of terroir as decomposed granite soils and maritime breezes and so forth. And it did begin with a vision. I mean, when Paul Sauer inherited that farm in 1929, there was absolutely nothing. I spoke to his aunt before she passed away, and she remembers running around on the farm there in the 30s, and there was nothing. They were busy clearing brambles and fynbos and this sort of thing. And this man, who was a career politician, he just had this desire and ambition and commitment to make wine on that piece of earth. Whether he knew what was waiting for Kanonkop status, one would never know. Whether he recognized the potential that's going to come from that, one wouldn't know. But I mean, he put the first vines in the soil, and that vision, I think, still drives Kanonkop today. That vision was passed on to Jannie Krige and Tannie Mary, and they also inspired that vision to their sons, Johan and Paul, and obviously through the winemakers. And last night, Bayer said that, when he came to Kanonkop in 1980, he got two brothers in Johan and Paul. And I mean, you cannot say something like that without sharing a real belief and commitment that what you're busy with on this patch of earth is exceptional in terms of winemaking. And obviously the quality that evolved from vintage to vintage through Jan, through Beyers, through Abrie, has kept inspiring them and continues to inspire them today. And I'm sure will inspire the generations of the future. So very much a part of the human DNA, which we've seen in great family wineries all over the world. It's definitely one of the factors that's driven Kanonkop into these lofty realms it finds itself in today.
And lofty realms is no overstatement. That is exactly where Kanonkop sits. And it sits with a tradition that has been picked up and run with by subsequent winemakers. And I use the plural very gently because there have only been two more since Jan Boehlert. And the second of those is our third guest on the show today. Abrie, lovely to have you with us. You've come through a short path in terms of the number of winemakers, but a long one in terms of the time that you've all spent with this remarkable brand. Let's go back to the very start. What for you, from your perspective, was it that Jan Boehlert lent to Kanonkop as a platform that, first of all, Beyers, who we'll talk about more in a moment, and now yourself, have been able to build on?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's thank you for having us on your show. It's always a privilege to share some of our knowledge. From Jan, I think one of the most important things, he was one of the first guys that really focused on terroir and what was supposed to grow on Kanonkop. I think for many years we've struggled in South Africa to really find the right fit for varietals for certain sites. Nowadays it's becoming more obvious, but back then, people were planting grapes for distilling purposes. They were planting grapes for what, Stellenbosch farmers winery needed, not necessarily what suited their soils best. And that carried on through the 80s and the 90s, and even through the early parts of the 2000s. People were still planting Sauvignon Blanc in hot areas in around the country. And so Jan, I think, was a pioneer when it comes to planting pinotages on these slopes, bush vine, in a certain form that could handle the wind and the growing conditions well, and then also Cabernet Sauvignon. And so that made our life much easier later on, because a lot of the grafting and the hard work figuring this stuff out was done by him and also by Bayer.
The baton that gets handed over from one winemaker to another always fascinates me, because on one hand, if the winemaker has done a good job and you suspect that she or he will have, then there shouldn't be too much to change. But by the same token, every winemaker has got an artist inside of them, and there is some imprint of your own style, your own impression, your own direction to be made. So it's a balance to be made. Talk to me about that transition from Jan Boerlinson to Beyers, and then from Beyers, who we know particularly for his magic with pinotage, into handing it over to yourself.
Yeah, the handover, we've talked a lot over the years. I think both these gentlemen, have always been very, very generous with their knowledge and sharing. And, you can always pick up the phone or even just drive in for a visit and talk about wine and talk about Kanonkop. So I think from Jan's side, he started with that. And so I think over time, it is very, very important that the brand and the style of the brand stays consistent, and because that's what people expect from Kanonkop, not only Kanonkop but other farms as well. I think the transition from Jan to Beyers was seamless. And again, when I took over from Beyers, we were mates before I joined Kanonkop. We went on a trip to France once, a golfing trip. I didn't even pack golf clubs, but it was a golfing trip. And on the airport on the way back, he said, "No, I think it's time that I join him. He needs somebody." And that was the interview, and then, talking to Jan and Paul asked me if I was married, and Jan said, "Don't reinvent the wheel." That was about it. I think 3 or 4 sentences. That was my interview. And I think one of the most important things that was said was, you don't have to win anything. So I think when you look nowadays, winemakers, that's a point that there's a lot of pressure of them to really be visible on a platform where the wines do well at wine shows, or quickly recognized by certain authorities. But there was no such expectation. It was more pressure on, keep the style consistent, build on that. And for the first year or two, that was quite, I think, a challenging thing. As a younger guy at that point, you want to create and you want to, be creative and put your thumbprint on the bottle. And then after a year or two, you realize that making something or refining something is much harder than making something new. And today, for me, it's so obvious. I can think of 20 new wines or different wines to make right now, but how can I make the current wines better? That's far more difficult. And I love that challenge. I think it is, even if you can improve 0.5% or 1% a year on year, then you're doing well, then you're doing really great. And I think that was an important part of, the seamless transition from winemaker to winemaker.
I want to talk a little bit more about your specific wines in a second, Abrie, but really double back to Emile very quickly. Just these 3 winemakers, Emile, all 3 of them can lay a claim to be one of the finest we've had in the modern winemaking era in South Africa. The fact that all 3 are at the same estate is just such a big part of the success of Kanonkop. Tell us a little bit about the impact that these 3 have had and the mark that they've made, not just on Kanonkop, but on South African wine.
Now, I just want to go back to where Abrie was mentioning his interview because to get the job, and he had the job for about 7 months, and I was sent to write an article about the new winemaker at Kanonkop, the new young buck, and chatted to Abrie, and we always got along from day one. And Abrie turned to me during the conversation. He said, "Listen, Johan and Paul say, well, I mustn't reinvent the wheel. But where does it leave me? What mark can I make now? What are my challenges?" But all three of them have made their marks. Don't get, you must really realize. And then Jan, I said, we can't say enough about Jan, but we've mentioned Jan putting those fantastic wines in the market, the first Kanonkop vintages. And then Beyers came along, and he put the Paul Sour on the map in 1981. Now, that is South Africa's greatest red wine. Full stop. And apart from playing golf with Abrie and so forth, he also took Pinotage. He won that winemaker of the world award at the IWSC with the Pinotage. Now, that really took Pinotage from almost nowhere into the world of wine. So that was a major mark that Beyers made. And then Abrie came along, and you know what he's done with the Black Label? That is, and there's some future things happening with the Black Label, which I can't talk about now, which is just stupendous. That is really turned out. Abrie identified that old vineyard plant in 1953, long before the concept of old vine projects, heritage vineyards came along, and said this is totally unique. And he convinced Johan and Paul to bottle a separate Pinotage under the Black Label, which now has become a world classic. I remember walking into a wine shop in Burgundy a couple of years back, and I told the guy I'm South African. He says, "Well, we actually have South African wines here." And he had two bottles in his shop. One is a Verneuil Constance and one is a Black Label Pinotage. And I says, "Well, I can understand the Verneuil Constance because it's the history and the legacy and Napoleon and the great wine. But what are you doing with the Pinotage?" He says, This is one, if you want one great wine in the world from South Africa, you've got to have this." So all three of them, in their way, yes, we stuck to the knitting and are writing a lot about Kanonkop. Punch throughs every 2 hours and minimum intervention and open top fermenters. That's always going to go down. But all three winemakers are three, I don't use the word lightly, they are geniuses. And they've all left their mark, not only in improving the quality and looking at new ways of doing things and finding those excellent wines, but through like the Black Label and the Paul Sour and Jan Boland, each really making an indelible mark into the South African wine industry through Kanonkop. And I must just add that Dani de Wet also said last night that he, as a winemaker, he is privileged to be part of an industry that has got Kanonkop. We're not very hot at generically marketing South African wine globally. The institutions can't really do it for us at this stage. Perhaps in the future they will. But it's up to the big brands to grab the international imagination and prove the quality and the greatness that can come from South Africa. So that is why it's important to have a Kanonkop, which is a global leader with a South African label. Same with Hamilton Russell, same with the Wetzel's. So it's important that we have these great brands, because not only are they themselves making fantastic wines, and one is proud to have those wines coming from a country, but they're also establishing a recognition and an awareness of South Africa's greatness in terms of what we can offer to the world, Dan.
And that rightly gives Kanonkop reason to be very proud. And Paul, I have no doubt that you are. As you look back over your tenure, the time as a custodian of this Kanonkop brand, watching it grow, watching it flourish, what makes you proudest in all of this wonderful story?
Yes, and it's a difficult one. I personally believe in if you've got synergy between people working for you, and I don't want to say you keep everyone happy, but I mean, there's so much energy in this company that people always say, how we ourselves don't understand what the hell is happening here. Okay. And you can ask Abrie as well. I think he will confirm that, is that, you know, everyone is I mean, myself and Johan, we totally two different type of people. Okay. But it just works. And we were just lucky that all the winemakers we had, something just clicked. And it just worked. So it's why it is there. I don't know. To be proud of it, yes, I'm absolutely proud of it. I think everyone that works here must be proud of what we accomplish here. So yeah, that's my side.
A lot of that pride, as you both say and also infer, comes from the people, and I think that was something you celebrated. Was it last night? There was a rather special occasion at Kanonkop where some members of this great community of yours got shoved into the limelight and given some due credit.
Yeah, well, luckily, I hope this is the last one of the year. So we did functions all over the world, basically. And last night was the one we normally ended up at Kanonkop. So last night, hopefully, was the last of the 50th anniversary of Kanonkop. And yes, I mean, we had quite a bit of people around here, but it was nice to have Jan Boland there. It was nice to have Beyers there, and obviously Abrie as well. So that is the people that made Kanonkop basically what it is. So yeah, but it was quite a bit of. I don't think we've ever done a function as big as we did last night, but it all went well. Obviously, we didn't get into bed early enough, but that's part of the show.
It wouldn't be a wine celebration if it had gone any other way. Let's have a quick word, Abrie, about the wine at the moment. And it's an estate that is very focused. We get some South African estates where there's a little bit of just about everything. We get others where the focus is a lot more dialed in, and Kanonkop is exactly that. You know what you're exceptionally good at, and that is what you focus on. This range of wine that you have, the terroir would seem the natural place to start when looking at the success. But what is your sense as a winemaker and how all these different pieces come together to allow you to guide this wine into the kind of success that it achieves around the world?
Yeah, I was thinking when you were chatting to Paul now, so I think the culture we have on Kanonkop, it's incredible. And I want to compare it with the Springboks. We were privileged enough also to have a Springbok here last night, and for Frans Malherbe. But I think when you look at the Springboks over the years, there's certain teams with amazing talent, but they just don't get to make it work. And then we all complain about the coaches, and we complain about this and that, and but it doesn't matter how much talent there is if the environment isn't right to be creative and use those talents. You're not going to succeed. So again, being privileged to be able to build on what Jan and Beyers have done, I think that's the first thing. I'm not starting a new property. It's not new vineyards; it is established vineyards. They are supposed to grow here. I always say Pinotage chose Kanonkop. We didn't choose Pinotage and Cabernet for that matter. So that work has been done before me. So my effort that I could put in was really refining and focusing, but in an environment that allowed me to do that. No pressure from whatsoever from Paul or Johan. And also in 20 years or 22 years that I've been here, they've never said no for something that I could justify to add quality. It doesn't matter what the cost that was involved. If I could justify why I wanted to do something to improve quality, it's always been a yes. And I don't think there's any other winery that I know of that has done the same thing. So, And they also allow me to focus on winemaking. I don't have to sit and do, performance reports and whatever, and all the ISO and HACCPs and all this other stuff. Winemakers spend 30 to 40% of their time just doing all these certification requirements and stuff. And here they created a space where there's people that do that, and I can focus on the vineyards, on the winemaking, and just the lacquer stuff. So really privileged.
Well, the results show in the wine that you make. Wine that's got plenty of acclaim, and your 2015 Paul Sour with its 100 points is the wine that most people would probably point to, Abrie, as your greatest achievement. And without downplaying it in the slightest, I would argue slightly differently. And I would argue that over 2 decades, your greatest achievement has been consistently delivering not just the Paul Sours and the black labels and the Pinotage at its very peak, but also we were tasting last week some of the Kanonkop Cadet, which I think often gets lost in the noise of all of the big awards as to just how good a wine it is, and that you have for 20 odd years now been able to produce wine across the range from, I'm not sure we can apply the term entry level to Kanonkop, but the stuff that begins the Kanonkop story all the way through to the very top. And for 20 years now, vintage in, vintage out, you've been consistently giving us wine that punches above its weight, no matter what it is, no matter what it costs.
Yeah, that was, when I started here, and I think buyers will agree, I think the Paul Sour and Pinotage was the 2 wines that was internationally recognized, for the quality. But the Cadet and the Cabernet was the two lines that was a little bit lagging behind. And so coming back to Emile's, that we said about, so what is my job here? So immediately I took on the challenge of trying to, get all the wines at the same level. So that means when you open a bottle of wine, it will tell you it's a Kanonkop wine first, and then afterwards it is Pinotage, Cabernet, Cadet, whatever. And I think that gave me great satisfaction to try to push the Cadet, And so people say, is it the second wine? Is it your, what do you call it? I don't call it anything. I just call it the Cadet, because all that grapes gets handled the same way that we handle the black label or the Paul Sour. As soon as the grapes arrive here, we handle it the same way. And after a while, you realize that people judge a brand by its weakest link. It doesn't matter how good the Paul Sour is. If there's a weak link in your lineup, that will be used to pull you down. So we had to make all our wines get to a certain standard that there's no weak links. And that helped the Cadet range to grow to what it is, 2 million bottles today, which is massive in South African context at that price point. But it's about people recognizing the quality. Most people, they don't know why they like. They know what they like. They don't know why they like it. So if you just must make a wine that the majority of people will like, they don't need to know why they like it. And I think that the Cadet, ticks those boxes.
50 years of wine at Kanonkop. You've been involved in more than 40% of those vintages. It's a staggering statistic. Again, I name check Paul Sour 2015 as the expected answer. Can you possibly tell me what your favorite wine in all of that time has been? Is it the Paul Sour 2015 or is it something else?
I would say probably the 03 vintage Paul Sour was probably and for different reasons, but in 2008, that wine, I think that wine won the Pichon Trophy, if I'm correct. But so it was a whole lead up. We were in France, in Burgundy, for a week, tasting a group of winemakers and friends, and then we went to London, and the Springboks beat the English on Twickenham, so that was great. And then that Thursday evening, I think it was the IWC Awards, and we were awarded, International Winemaker of the Year, and that was in November. And then in December, my son was born, so it was a lineup of, all of these things. I just thought, how, somebody's praying for me, or something's gone right in my life, because there's just too much good things happening at the same time. And I think it's always memorable being the 03 Paul Sour. And it's still a great wine when you taste it today.
And there is one lone bottle of the Paul Sour 2015 up for auction. The guys at Singita have given us that. The 2015 100-pointer, that will be on sale. The Dan Really Likes Wine charity auction next Tuesday. Join us in person or online with Strauss. Emile, I'm going to ask you not so much about a specific wine and vintage, but about a more general space, and that is the space that is Pinotage. And I know you've mentioned it a little so far, but I'll push you just for a touch more of your insight on the role that Kanonkop has played in defining Pinotage for South Africa, often in the face of some fairly fierce criticism, usually from people who hadn't actually drunk the stuff but wanted to jump on a bandwagon, and how that in turn has led us to discover how South Africa really should be interpreting this grape that, as we see from Kanonkop in the right hands, can do wonderful things.
Sure, Dan, that's a long one. I mean, I don't get into arguments about grape varieties or regions or discussions and comparing whatever, but it's one of the it's planted on Kanonkop with reason and vision. I think that Paul Sour and the guys from Bellevue, and there was Kanonkop grapes we used to make that first Pinotage from 1959, the Landsrack wine. That was Kanonkop Pinotage was in there, and it just showed its greatness. It's got a fantastic, elegant, refined, yet robust profile, and it is what it is. I'm good in blind tasting, but I can spot a Kanonkop Pinotage from a hell of a Pinotage lineup, and it never tried to be something else. It didn't try to. I know a lot of people saying, "No, we must make Pinotage the more Burgundian, lighter style. We must use less wood or whatever." It just stuck to its guns, and they made the Pinotage with new wood from those dryland vineyards on the slopes, and it is what it is. And it won the I can't remember what year it was, but best red wine with best wine in the world, best winemaker in the world for Bayers with the Pinotage. I mean, surely that says enough in itself. And whenever there's been these little nitpicking mud fights about Pinotage, yes or no, and so on, Kanonkop's never mentioned in those arguments. It's just accepted as a great wine and a great being Pinotage from Kanonkop. And as I said, the Black Label and the 2021 is just such an amazing wine. I mean, I had to have a bottle and a half last night with Jan Boerland. Fortunately, he could procure that for us. And it is just such a fantastic wine, and in every sense of the word. So I think what the future in Pinotage in South Africa is healthy, that is still a discussion, that you being the current purveyor of hot wine news is still asking that question. I think it's healthy for the industry that we are still having those debates about Pinotage, yes or no. It will possibly, the arguments and the debates will inspire some winemakers to go this way or that way with Pinotage, and certain people will start liking it more or liking it less or whatever. But Kanonkop Pinotage will always remain Kanonkop Pinotage, and it will continue to be a great wine. And as I said before, anything under a Kanonkop label is a guarantee of excellence, and it's recognized as such throughout the world. And if it has Pinotage on the label, it's great for the variety, and it's great for South Africa. And that's what we need. It's all about, at the end of the day, we want to get South African brands, great varieties, wines out there, and improve our proposition as purveyors of wine excellence. And Kanonkop Pinotage, I mean, that's a pretty hot calling card I wouldn't mind having in my pocket, and I'll proudly go onto any wine stage in the world, if ever requested, and enthuse about it and praise its properties.
The dinner last week that I spoke of, the celebration included some 1988 Pinotage, That was just about my most enjoyable wine of the evening. The combination of knowing the age of it, drinking so superbly, and also giving a firm 2 fingers to the anti-pinotage department. That's just a super, super wine. Speaking of slightly older vintages, I see my mum's watching the show. Helen Nicol, no Paul Sour on the rack, sadly, but at least there's a 2017 Cab Sav to open later. That's got a shelf life of about 10 minutes once that cork is popped, as should be the case, because it is terrific wine. Paul, before I wrap up with a question on what lies ahead, we got from Abrie the sense of his favorite wine. Is there one from over the years that for you has got a special resonance, a special meaning, one that stands out above the many, many others that you've given us?
You just had it on a label there. It was, for me, 2001. Pinotage was, I always go back to certain stuff, but the Pinotage 2001 was superb. And then my next favorite would be 07, I think. 2015, yep, it's a great vintage and it's a great wine, everything, but it still needs some time. So we're going to have a look at it. But 01 and 07 to me is two great vintages.
And we had many more than just those two. A wine that's held up so well and continues to tell this story that is Kanonkop. A story, Paul, that is by no means finished. In fact, in many ways, I think you guys are just getting started. I see Grant Sauls is watching the show saying, great show today. Great to hear some of the history, super wines. Well, let's hear some of the future to go with the history. What is the vision going forward? Where do you see the horizon for a brand and a state of wine that has already achieved so much, Paul?
I think Abrie touched it earlier when he say, don't try to reinvent the wheel. I think we've been doing some stuff over the years, and I think we've been doing it right. We were lucky to purchase a farm right next to us, so that's a new part of business that lies ahead. And I think at the end of the day, that will all go under the Kanonkop label. And yeah, I think if you keep on doing what we're doing, so keep on doing the good, and the rest will just happen. So yeah, just keep on doing the good stuff.
Like, it's a very simple philosophy, and it's one that all of you have had a part in bringing together. Abrie as winemaker now for more than 20 years. Now, I suspect, Abrie, you and I could probably be chatting in another 20 years' time and still be talking about the wine you're making at Kanonkop. Emile, with a wonderful history, and it's a book, if you haven't read yet, one I highly recommend getting your hands on, because it's not just about Kanonkop, but it's about such a valuable piece of South Africa's wine legacy. And Paul, together with Johan, having steered this Kanonkop ship to just greater and greater heights, and it's been wonderful to see. So congratulations to all of you for 50 years and counting, and I stress that, and counting, but also thank you, because I think as both South African wine lovers who drink our wine here, but also South African wine lovers who want to see the rest of the world enjoying, admiring, and appreciating our wine, Kanonkop really has given us so much, and not just as a South African wine institution, but I'd say a South African institution in itself. And Abrie, your rugby comparison earlier with the Springboks, I think, is most apt. Rugby does us proud around the world, but our wine does consistently as well, and none more so than Kanonkop. So enjoy. I hope, Paul, that even though you had a late night last night, the celebrations are still continuing, as they should for the rest of the year. Sure, Abrie will jump in there as well. And Emile hasn't stopped celebrating something since I first met him 20 years ago. So that's not going to stop either. Guys, thank you for sharing some thoughts, sharing some memories, and sharing that passion that you have for the brand. It is infectious. And I think it's a good point. As my dear mum opens her 2017 cab, I've got some older cab upstairs in the cellar, which I'm heading off to open now. So congratulations again. Well done on 50 years. And Abrie, I've actually got it in the diary. 2048, we've got you on the show to discuss the 70th year and the wine you're making then. So make sure that's in the diary.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a
Bye,
great
Dr. Emile.
evening. Paul Krige, together with his brother Johan, custodians of Kanonkop, Abrie Beeslaar, more than 20 years now making wine at Kanonkop, following on from first John Bullen Kutsia and then Bayers Truter, who would have loved to have joined us today, but unfortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately for them, he's busy doing an auction in Hermanus, something he's very good at, but here in spirit, and now Abrie running the wine, and then Emile Joubert. Again, that book, it's a cracker. Do get it, do read it, do learn more about South Africa's wine history, of which Kanonkop has such a rich chapter. That does it for today. Next week is a big one for many reasons. On Monday, I'll be talking to a number of people who have supported the Dan Really Likes Wine charity auction. Amongst them, Matt Day from Klein Constantia has given me a 5-litre and a 9-litre bottle to auction off on Tuesday night. Skulk Willem Joubert, that villa far site up at Tybosh. Skulk will be chatting to us about that. They're amongst the range of guests we have on the show. Louis Straden from Annie Else, who doubles up as a key member of the Cape Winemakers Trust, telling us why it's so important to support the trust and the work they do, which we'll be doing through the auction on Tuesday. If you'd like to join us, tickets available at Norman Goodfellows if you're in Johannesburg. Otherwise, look out on the Dan Really Likes Wine platforms or straight to the Strauss website for the link to be part of the auction on Tuesday night. And then Wednesday, I'm on my way off to Bordeaux for a couple of days. Some visits to, amongst others, Chateau Cohen and Chateau Angelus, to see just how far behind estates like Kanonkop, the French, are, and whether they've got a chance of catching up. That does it for this evening. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. A big thank you to Kanonkop for a very special show, and congratulations, 50 wonderful years of doing South Africa proud. Goodbye. Hi, I'm Dan Nicol, and this Christmas through the Nicol Foundation I'm working with Johnson Workwear to produce the Jumper for Joy, and we're really excited about this because not only does it look extremely cool, it's also going to be helping a lot of young people around South Africa, because every jumper sold through the Johnson Workwear stores, 23 across South Africa, or online at johnsonworkwear.com, where delivery is free, the proceeds are going to two great causes. One of them is Reach for a Dream, changing the lives and making dreams come true for young children with life-threatening illness and their families as well, supporting them. And then the Johnson Foundation is also changing lives, empowering young people and getting into communities and doing some extraordinary work. So simply by buying this jumper, either for yourself, as a Christmas gift for your whole family, for your whole staff, you're not only going to look seriously awesome, but you're also going to be helping so many young people this Christmas, and through the Jumper for Joy, spreading joy this Christmas. Thanks for your help, thanks for your support, and I look forward to seeing you wear one of these this Christmas.